He set the pen on top of the folder and turned it so the cap faced me, the way you turn a plate toward a guest. Sign where it is flagged. Family doesn't keep a ledger. 6 years I ran that house. I cooked for it. I charted for it. I lifted grown men out of bathtubs at 2 in the morning. And I locked the medicine cabinet every night with a key I wore on a string under my shirt. 6 years and not one paycheck. Here is what my stepfather did not know as he slid that pen across his own kitchen table. The house he was asking me to sign away had never belonged to him, not for a single day of his life. It belonged to my grandmother, and by a paper she had filed quietly 2 years before any of this, it already belonged to me. He did not know one more thing. My name was already sitting on a loan at a credit union 40 minutes away, $84,000. A loan I had never heard of and never signed. Today, I count what other people swear is gone. I am a forensic accountant. I reconstruct money that fiduciaries steal from the people who trusted them. And I put the number in front of a judge. Last winter, I finally pulled the records of my own family, and I made every dollar they took walk back in daylight to a ledger with my name at the top. My name is Maren Prout. I am 34 years old. If you have ever been the one who was counted on for everything and counted as nothing, the one who carried the keys but never the deed, stay with me. I am going to show you the exact paper that set me free. And I am going to show you the moment the most boring document in the county became the loudest thing in that house. Before I take you back, do one small thing for me. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there. I read them. It matters more than you think on a night, like the one I am about to describe. Now, let me take you to the kitchen. It was the day after Christmas, 2012, 8:40 in the morning. There was old snow on the steps of the house on Sutton Road and new snow coming behind it. And I had been awake since 4 because that was when Mr. Halloran in the front bedroom woke up confused and needed someone to sit with him until the confusion passed. I was always the someone. My mother, Sandra, was at the counter in her good cardigan, drying a wine glass from the night before with a dish towel. My stepfather, Dale, sat at the head of the table with a closing folder open in front of him and a fountain pen lying across it. My brother Cole leaned in the doorway with his coat already on, like a man who has somewhere better to be. The folder had little plastic flags down the right side, 5 of them. I remember counting the flags before I understood what they meant, because counting is what I do when a room goes wrong. It is just a formality, my mother said. She did not look up from the glass. The house is a lot of liability, Maren. Insurance, the licensing, the state inspections. Dale's been carrying all of it. We're just putting it where it belongs. Where it belongs. I have thought about that phrase for 11 years. I asked to read the papers. My mother sighed, the way she sighed at residents who pressed the call button too often. Dale slid the pen toward me. Sign where it is flagged, he said. Family doesn't keep a ledger. That sentence was not new. I had been hearing it my whole life. It was what she said when I asked at 17 whether I could be paid a little for the overnight shifts. It was what she said when I asked at 19 whether I could go to the community college in the fall. It was the family motto, stitched on nothing, hanging over everything. Family doesn't keep a ledger, asterisk. So I read the flags, and on the first page, in the bold black box at the top, was the word quitclaim, and under it, the legal description of the house on Sutton Road, and the name of the person transferring it away. The name was not my mother's. The name was Opal Renner. My grandmother, who on that morning was in the back bedroom, 6 months out from a stroke that had taken her words and most of her right side, propped on 3 pillows, unable to hold a spoon, much less a pen. The deed was dated September. I did the arithmetic in my head, the way you do when something is sliding. The stroke was in April. By September, she could not sign her own name. I knew that because I was the one who signed for her deliveries. I was the one who held the cup. I set the pen down. I did not raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice at that woman. And I want you to understand that the quiet is not weakness. The quiet is the sound of a person deciding to win later instead of feeling better. Now, who signed this in September? I asked. My mother kept drying a glass that was already dry. Marin, she said, don't make this ugly. After everything we've done for you. I picked up 3 things off that table and that counter. And I want you to remember all 3 because they come back. I picked up the ring of house keys I had carried since I was 16. I picked up a green hardback logbook, the one I filled in every night, every dose, every vital sign, every visitor. And from the drawer by the sink, where it had been kept since the spring, I picked up an envelope with my name on it in my grandmother's handwriting. Shaky and slanted, the last clear thing she ever wrote. I had $41 in my coat pocket. It was tip money, the bills the old people pressed into my hand over the years, when their families weren't looking. I put the keys, the logbook, and the letter into a grocery bag, and I walked out the back door into the snow, and I did not sign. My mother called after me, "You'll be back by dinner." I was not back by dinner. I was not back for 11 years. And the next time I came up that driveway, I came up with the legal owner of the house she was standing in. Stay with me, because the road from that morning to that ownership runs straight through the most ordinary filing cabinet in Licking County. Ohio. Let me tell you what that house actually was, because the word home does a lot of lying. The house on Sutton Road was a 6-bed residential care home for the elderly. My grandmother had started it in her own living room in the 80s, when caring for old people in a real house instead of a tile hallway was a radical, tender idea. She got licensed. She put in the grab bars and the ramp and the second furnace. She took in 6 residents at a time, and she fed them at a real table, and she knew every one of their birthdays. It was hers. It was the work of her hands. My mother married Dale when I was 12, and somewhere in there, the home stopped being a calling and started being a revenue stream. They added me to it when I was 16. I want to be specific because specificity is the only honest way to describe this kind of thing. I was not helping out. From the fall, I turned 16 to the winter, I turned 22. I worked an average of 60 hours a week in that house. I did the 4 to midnight and I did the overnights. Nobody else wanted. I learned to transfer a falling body, so neither of us got hurt. I learned to read the early gray look that means a urinary tract infection in a person who can no longer tell you they hurt. I learned to do the medication pass off a paper chart, every pill timed and initialed. Because my grandmother had taught me before her stroke that the chart is the truth and the truth keeps people alive. I was paid nothing, room and board. My mother called it as if I were a boarder in the house. I cleaned. Here is the number, because I am the kind of person who years later sat down and ran it once. The honest way at the lowest wage. The state said a caregiver was worth back then $9 an hour, 60 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. 9 times 60 is 540. 540 times 50 is 27,000. 27,000 times 6 years is $162,000. $162,000 of work. And I want you to hold that figure because it becomes load bearing later. They did not just take a house. They took 6 years of a teenager's labor and called it love. That is the pattern. Now, let me give you the 3 times the pattern showed its teeth, because each one is a brick in what came after. The first brick, The spring I was 18, I got into the nursing program at the branch campus. 2-year degree. I had filled out the financial aid forms at the library on a Tuesday. In secret, the way you do a thing you already know your family will take from you. The acceptance came in a thin envelope, which I learned that day means yes. That night at dinner, I told them my mother did not even put down her fork. She said, "And who covers your shifts?" Mr. Delgado is end stage. You'd walk out on a dying man for a piece of paper. Dale said the state was tightening the staffing ratios and they couldn't afford an outside aide. Cole said nothing because Cole was already in his second year at a 4-year school, 2 hours away. On money, I did not understand the source of yet. I deferred the program. Then I deferred it again. Then the acceptance lapsed. I want you to notice that they never said no. They were far too careful to ever say no. They just arranged the world. So the answer was no. And let me say it to myself. Remember that because it is exactly how they took the house. The second brick. When I was 20, a checkbook went missing from a resident's room. A woman named Eunice, who had a son in Cincinnati who visited twice a year. There was a meeting. My mother sat me at the kitchen table and explained, gently, the way she explained everything, that the family had decided it would be simplest if the missing money was attributed to me, because I had access to the rooms, and because if it went on the stay report, it could threaten the license. And a license is everyone's livelihood, and family doesn't keep a ledger. Asterisk, I had not touched Eunice's checkbook. I never found out who did. But I learned the thing that day that I would need 11 years later. I learned that my name was, to them, a blank space, a line you could write a number on when you needed somewhere to put it, file that it detonates at a credit union. The third brick was the one I did not understand until I had the training to understand it. When I was 20, I got sent to the county recorder's office in Newark to drop off a licensing renewal. And while I waited, I did the thing bored teenagers do. I read the papers stacked on the public counter. There was a recorded mortgage against the house on Southern Road, a second mortgage taken out 2 years before for $60,000. I knew exactly what year that was. It was the year my brother Cole started at the 4-year school 2 hours away. The school I had been told there was no money on earth for me to attend. They had borrowed against my grandmother's house to pay for my brother's degree. And that same season, they had looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Family doesn't keep a ledger." I did not say anything. I was 20, and I did not yet know that a house can be turned into cash by people who do not own it, as long as everyone in the room agrees not to look too closely. By the time I learned that, I was the thing they had turned into cash. File that one too, because the $84,000 did not come out of nowhere. It came out of 11 years of practice. The fourth brick is the one that still cost me sleep. By the spring, I was 21. My grandmother was failing. Not the stroke yet, that came the next year, just the long, soft slide. Some days she knew me. Some days she called me by her dead sister's name. But she had clear hours, usually in the early morning, and on one of those mornings she got hold of my wrist with a grip hold farm. Women keep to the very end, and she said, "The thing I am going to give you now, the thing I have repeated to myself in parking lots and exam rooms and on the worst nights of the last decade." She said, "Write it all down, Marin. The people who tell you not to count are the ones afraid of the total." I thought she meant the medication chart. I told you she had drilled me on the chart. So I said, "I always do Gron," and I went back to my logbook. I did not understand for 9 more years that she was not talking about pills. She was talking about everything. She was handing me the only weapon she had left, and I tucked it away like a grocery list. Stay with me, because that sentence is going to turn a key in a lock that my whole family thought was sealed. I owe you the whole truth about my grandmother, Opal Renner, because she is the one good thread in this. And the master rule of an honest story is that the ally gets to be a person, not a saint. She was not soft. She swore at the snow. She kept her opinions of my mother behind her teeth for 30 years, which is its own kind of toughness. She wore a man's wristwatch and read the obituaries first and the rest of the paper second. And she watched me. That was her gift, the rarest one. Most people in that house looked at me to see whether the work was done. Opal looked at me to see whether swine I was done, whether I was running on empty, whether the smile was real. She was the only adult in 20 years who ever asked me a question and then was quiet long enough to actually hear the answer. There is one afternoon I keep. The spring I was 19 in 2010, Grant had me drive her into town in her old sedan, the one with the man's watch sitting in the cup holder because it had gotten too big for her wrist by then. She would not tell me where we were going. We parked at the county building, and she went inside alone, slow on her cane, and came out 20 minutes later folding a yellow receipt into her coat pocket. And she would not tell me what it was for. Then she made me drive her to the dairy stand at the edge of town, and she bought me a milkshake I had not asked for, and she watched me drink the whole thing without saying one word. I thought she was just being grand. I know now what she filed that morning. I knew the date the instant I saw it. Years later, on the chain of title, she drove 40 minutes round trip to put my name on a house where nobody could argue with it. And then she bought me a milkshake and let me believe it was an ordinary Tuesday. Stay with me because that yellow receipt is going to come back, recorded in the public record of the county, and it is going to win. She never tried to fix it. She never told me to stand up to my mother or pack a bag or call somebody. I used to resent that a little, the not fixing. I understand it now. She knew that if she pushed me out, they would have closed the door behind me and called it my choice. So she did the only durable thing. She made a record, and she told me in the only language she had left to make one too. I learned how good a record she had made on a cold afternoon in a county office. But I am getting ahead, back to that morning in 2012 when I walked out with a grocery bag and $41. Here is what I did not do. I did not scream. I did not call the state on them, though I had grounds. I did not even open my grandmother's letter for 3 days because some part of me knew that once I read it, I would not be able to unknow what it said. And I needed my hands steady to drive. I want to tell you about those 3 days because they are the truest measure of how that house worked. I did not go to a friend because 6 years of 60-hour weeks does not leave you with friends. I did not go to the police because the only crime I could have named out loud was that I had not been paid. And I did not yet have the word for what they had actually done. I drove to a diner off the highway and ordered coffee I could barely afford and sat in a booth until the windows went black. And the whole time, the grocery bag with the keys and the logbook and the letter sat on the bench across from me the entire time. Each of those nights, I took the envelope out and held it, and each of those nights, I put it back because I was afraid that whatever my grandmother had written would either ask too much of me or forgive them, and I did not have the strength that week for either one. It took me 9 years to finally read it. When I did, it asked nothing of me at all. It had already done the asking in a county office in 2010 with a milkshake afterward. What I did was survive, and I am going to give you that part fast. The way it actually felt, which is to say in a blur, because the years you spend climbing out of a hole are not the interesting part of anyone's life, and I will not pat them to look brave. I rented a room over a hardware store in Newark, Ohio, from a man who did not ask why a 22-year-old had no references. I waited tables on the breakfast shift and stalked at the warehouse club on the late shift and slept in the 4 hours between. I enrolled at the community college in the winter term, and because nursing reminded me too much of the house, I took the one elective that had an open seat, which was accounting. I sat in the back. The instructor put a balance sheet on the board, debits on one side, credits on the other, and said the two sides have to agree or you have made an error somewhere. And something in my chest stood up. For the first time in my life, I was looking at a system where the rule was that everything has to add up. And if it doesn't, somebody is lying, and the page itself will tell you. I had spent 6 years in a house where nothing added up and the page was a logbook. Nobody but me would ever read. I changed my major that afternoon. I will not pretend it was fast or clean. It took me 5 years to finish a 2 year degree because I was paying for the class at the time. I passed the certified public accountant exam on the second try in a strip mall testing center, and I sat in my car afterward and ate a gas station sandwich and did not call a single person because there was no one to call. I got hired at a regional firm in Columbus in the unit that nobody at the office parties wanted to talk about, the one that does forensic work, divorces where the money disappeared, estates where the numbers don't reconcile. And more than anything else, the cases that found me like water finds the low ground, elder financial exploitation, old people whose own children had drained them, fiduciaries who looted the people they were sworn to protect and did it with paperwork calmly over years. I was good at it immediately. And I think you already understand why. I had been raised inside the crime. I knew the smell of it. I knew the cardigan and the dish towel and the gentle voice that says, Fendon, make this ugly. Asterisk, I had a daughter by then, a small, fierce person named June, and I had promised her a life with no logbook in it. I built that life one reconciled account at a time. For 9 years, I worked everyone's case but my own. I told myself the house on Sutton Road was the past. I told myself the letter in the drawer of my desk, still in its envelope, still in my grandmother's shaking hand, was a keepsake and not a clue. Then, last winter, a case crossed my desk that broke something open. An elderly man transferred out of his own home by a quitclaim deed. His daughter recorded while he was hospitalized after a stroke. I read the file, the deed, the dates, the little notary box at the bottom. And my hands went cold because it was my grandmother's story typed up under a stranger's name. That night, I went home and I opened the drawer and I finally read Opal Renner's letter all the way through. And then I did the thing I do for a living. I started pulling records. Stay with me. This is where the most boring office in Ohio becomes the most important room in the story. I want to walk you through the evidence, the way I built it, one document at a time, because the power of it is in the order, and because I need you to see that not one piece of it came from luck. There was no glitch, no accident left a microphone on. Everything I am about to describe, any one of you could request tomorrow because most of it is public record. And the rest of it had been sitting in my own desk for 9 years, waiting for me to be brave enough to read it. The first document I pulled was the deed itself. I drove to the county recorder's office in Licking County, and I requested a certified copy of every instrument recorded against the house on Sutton Road. Anyone can do this. It costs a few dollars a page. I sat at the public terminal and I watched the chain of title scroll up the screen, and there it was. The quitclaim deed recorded the 9th of September, 2012, transferring the property from Opal Renner to Sandra and Dale. The grantor's signature was a wandering, broken line. I had seen my grandmother's real signature 10,000 times in that logbook. This was not it. This was a hand being moved by another hand. The second document was the one underneath it, and it is the reason I am telling you the story instead of just grieving it. Scrolling down the chain of title, recorded 2 years earlier, the 14th of May, 2010, was an instrument called a transfer on death designation affidavit. In Ohio, an owner can file a paper that says, when I die, this real estate goes to this person, and it passes outside of probate automatically the moment of death. My grandmother had filed one. She had filed it herself in clear health 2 years before her stroke, while she could still drive her own car and sign her own name. With a heavy, confident hand, I knew. And the beneficiary she named on that recorded affidavit, in the public record of the county, for anyone to find, was me, Maren Pruitt, her granddaughter. I want you to understand what that means because my whole family did not understand it. And it is the hinge the entire story turns on. A transfer on death affidavit can be revoked, but only by the owner in writing, properly executed, while competent. A quitclaim deed signed by a woman 6 months after a stroke that took her words, notarized in September when she could not hold a spoon, does not revoke anything. It is not transfer. It is a forgery, wearing the costume of a transfer. The valid paper was the one from 2010. The valid paper named me. The house had been mine legally, automatically, from the second my grandmother passed in the winter of 2013. My family had spent the next 11 years living in mortgaging and trying to sell a house that already belonged to me, and they never knew because they never read the chain of title. Because they were the kind of people who believe paper is whatever they say it is in a confident enough voice. I sat in my car in that parking lot with a certified copy in my lap, and I cried once, the only time in this entire story. I am telling you exactly when and where because I want you to know I am not a machine. I am a person who lost a grandmother and a childhood and 11 years, and the grief came out of me all at once in the county parking lot, in the cold, with the engine running. And then I wiped my face and I went back inside and I requested the next document because Opal Rena did not raise a woman who cries with the engine running for very long. The third document was the notary. On the bottom of that fraudulent quitclaim was a notary stamp and a commission number. In Ohio, notary commissions are public. You can look up any notary, any commission on the Secretary of State's website in about 90 seconds. I looked up the woman who had stamped my grandmother's stolen deed. Her commission had expired in March of 2012. The deed was notarized in September of 2012. She had stamped a legal document with a seal that had been dead for 6 months. My grandmother used to squint at notary stamps. When she signed anything, and she used to say a stamp is only as good as a date on it. I had thought it was an old woman's fussiness. It was the most useful thing anyone ever taught me. There was one record I needed that was not public, and how I got it matters, so I would tell you. As the beneficiary my grandmother had named, and as the person who had held her healthcare power of attorney through those last 11 months, I was entitled to her medical records, and I requested them the proper way in writing with the proper authorization, exactly the way I tell my own clients. They arrived in a thick envelope. The admission from April of 2012, the word aphasia, which is the clinical word for a stroke, taking a person's language away. The nursing notes that said she could not reliably write her name, could not consistently say what month it was, could not be left alone. Every one of those notes was dated 5 months before the deed. A woman who could not name the month in April did not knowingly sign away her own home in September. I did not need a handwriting expert to call that signature a forgery. I had a hospital saying the hand could not have held the pen. The medicine and the deed told the same story, and only one of them was lying. And the fourth document was the one that had been hiding inside my own name for 11 years. When I pulled my own credit history, the way I have my clients pull theirs, there was a home equity line of credit. Maple Ridge Federal Credit Union opened the 20th of September 2012, 11 days after they recorded the fake deed. $84,000 secured against a house on Sutton Road. The borrower was me. They had needed a person whose name was already on the home's business filings. As the listed manager, and that person was the teenager they had made me. They had taken out $84,000 against my grandmother's house in my name with a forged signature, and they had been making the minimum payments out of the home's revenue for over a decade so that I would never see it on my own credit unless I went looking. I had spent 9 years teaching clients to go looking. I finally went looking at my own life. There was a fifth thing, and it was the cruelest, and it lived in the green logbook I had carried out in the grocery bag. My own handwriting. Every night, every visitor, every absence, The logbook proved in my teenage block letters that for the 11 months between my grandmother's stroke and her death, my mother had been collecting Opal's pension and her benefits, $1,900 a month, while billing the state for her care, while I did the actual caring for free. $1,900 a month for 11 months is $20,900, taken from a woman who could no longer speak by the people standing closest to her bed. The logbook I kept because I was told to keep it the drudgery they assigned me was the one record in that house that they did not control. Write it all down. Marin asterisk, she knew the whole time. I had a folder now, a real one. And I am not asking you to be angry because I am not asking anything of you. But if there is a record somewhere with your name on it that you have been afraid to read, this is the part where I tell you to go read it. Drop the word reading in the comments if you are going to. I'll be reading those. Here is where most stories like mine go wrong and where my profession saved me from myself. The temptation when you finally hold the folder is to drive to Sutton Road and stand in the kitchen and read it out loud and watch their faces. I have watched 100 clients want exactly that, and I have watched it cost them their cases because a confrontation is an argument, and an argument is something the other side gets to participate in. I was not going to give my mother a turn to speak. I was going to do the thing she had never once done for me. I was going to follow the rules perfectly all the way to the end. I retained a real estate and estates attorney in Columbus, a careful woman named Ruth Okafor, and I want to be clear that I never once used my own position or my own firm against my own family, because the second you bend a rule, you hand it back to them. I recused myself from my own case the way I would from any conflict. I was not the forensic accountant here. I was the granddaughter. I just happened to be a granddaughter who knew exactly which lawful doors to knock on and in what order. Ruth read my folder for a full hour without speaking, which is the longest I have ever watched a person read anything. Then she closed it and said the sentence I had been waiting 11 years to hear without knowing I was waiting for it. You do not need a jury for this, she said. You do not need anyone to confess, and you do not need anyone to be sorry. You need a certified copy, an expired commission, and the truth told in the order it happened. You already have all three. I did have all three. I had had them for months. I had only been afraid that wanting it to be true this badly would somehow make it false. It was not false. The documents did not care how I felt about them. And after a lifetime in a house where feelings were the only currency and all of it flowed in one direction, a room where the paper outranked the feelings was the safest place I had ever stood, we knocked on 4. The first door was the county. We filed a quiet title action. That is the lawsuit you bring to ask a court to look at a chain of title and declare on the record who actually owns a piece of land. We laid it out the way you lay out a reconciliation. Here is the transfer on death affidavit, properly recorded in 2010 by a competent owner. Here is the quitclaim deed, recorded in 2012, signed by a grantor 6 months post-stroke and notarized by a commission that had been expired for 6 months. Here is the medical record of the stroke. Here is the logbook in the caregiver's hand. We did not raise our voices. We numbered the exhibits. A quiet title. Action does not care how anyone feels. It cares what the documents say, and the documents said the house was mine. The second door was the Secretary of State. We filed a formal complaint against the notary, not an accusation, a citation. Commission expired March 2012. Acknowledgement executed September 2012. The dates do the work. A notary's whole job is to be the person in the room who certifies that a real human, competent, and willing signed a real document on a real date. She had certified a dead seal onto a stolen house. The state does not find that charming. The third door was the credit union and the bureaus. We filed an identity theft report and a forgery affidavit on the $84,000 line of credit with a police report number, the way I have walked 100 elderly clients through doing. The signature on the loan was not mine. I had never set foot in Maple Ridge Federal Credit Union. The actual borrowers, the people who had received and spent the money and made the payments, were Sandra and Dale, and their names were on the application in their own hands. A forged loan does not become your debt because someone has been quietly paying it for 11 years. It becomes the debt of the people who forged it. The fourth door was the one for Opal. We made a referral to the county on the pension, $20,900 diverted from an incapacitated woman over 11 months, documented to the date in the logbook her own granddaughter kept. Adult Protective Services does not unwind the past, but they write findings and a written finding from the state that says, financial exploitation occurred. It's a stone you cannot lift back out of the water. And then I did one thing for myself, and only one, and it was not loud. I thought about driving out to Sutton Road and reading it all to them at the kitchen table, where my stepfather had slid me the pen. I thought about it for about a day. Then I understood why I never would. For 22 years, every true thing I said out loud in that house got answered, reframed, and put away before it ever reached the floor. A spoken sentence was an invitation to argue, and she never lost an argument because she never fought one, she just outlasted it. A certified document does not argue back. You cannot outlast a recorded deed. You cannot wait out a court judgment until it gives up and agrees with you. I had lost every spoken contest of my childhood to a woman who never once raised her voice, and I was done entering contests. So I sent her something that could not be answered, only obeyed. I had Ruth send a single certified packet to the house on Sutton Road, a cover letter, 2 pages in the flat voice I use for reports, then the numbered exhibits behind it, the recorded transfer on death affidavit, the certified quitclaim, the notary's expired commission, printed off the state's own website with the date circled, the credit history with the forged loan, a copy of 1 page of the green logbook, the page that showed the date my grandmother's pension started flowing the wrong direction. I did not put a threat in the letter. I did not put a feeling in it. I put 6 numbered facts and 1 final paragraph. And I am going to give you that paragraph the way I wrote it because it is the closest I came to speaking. I am not writing to be paid back for what cannot be paid back. I am writing to tell you what is now true and what is now finished. The house is mine and has been since 2013. The loan in my name is not my debt. The state has the rest. You do not need to respond. There is nothing left here to discuss because everything I am sending you already happened and none of it needs your agreement to be real, asterisk. I signed it with my own name in my own hand, the heavy, confident way my grandmother taught me before the snow took her words. You want to know what they did? I'll tell you because this is the part where the anger you have been carrying for me gets to set itself down. My stepfather called the morning the packet arrived. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that one go too. The third time he left a message and there was no apology in it. There has still never been an apology in it. There was only the old confident voice asking me to be reasonable and reminding me again, after everything, that family doesn't keep a ledger. I saved that voicemail. I did not call back. My mother did not call. My mother wrote a long letter, 4 pages, in her good handwriting, about sacrifice and ingratitude and the years she spent keeping a roof over my head, and how a daughter who would do this to her own parents was not a daughter she recognized. There was, in 4 pages, not 1 sentence about my grandmother. Not one. I read it once, the way you read a deposition looking for facts. There were none. I put it in the file. Then the consequences landed, and they landed quietly, in the language of paper, which is the only language that was ever honest in my family. The court entered judgment on the quiet title action. The 2012 quitclaim was declared void. Title was confirmed in me, Marion Pruitt, by operation of the transfer on death affidavit, effective the date of my grandmother's death. The county's own records were corrected to say what they had quietly meant all along. My family had been living for 11 years in the house the law already said belonged to me, and now the law said it out loud. The Secretary of State revoked the notary's commission. There was a written finding. Her stamp had been expired for 6 months on the day she pressed it into my grandmother's stolen deed, and the state put that fact in a public document with her name on it forever. The credit union, facing a forgery affidavit and a police report, and an application signed in 2 other people's handwriting, removed the $84,000 line of credit from my name and reassigned the debt to the people who had actually borrowed and spent the money. My credit, which I had built one reconcile account at a time, came back clean. The debt went home to its true owners, and Adult Protective Services substantiated the finding on Opal's pension, $20,900. Financial exploitation of an incapacitated adult, documented in her granddaughter's logbook. A stone in the water that does not come back out. Here is the part I did not plan and did not need, the part that simply happened because the truth was finally written down in the right offices. My mother and Dale had already put the house on the market. They listed it in February before any of my paperwork landed, because in their minds, the quitclaim made it theirs to sell. They had a buyer, a retired couple from Columbus, cash heavy, financing the rest $210,000. Closing set for the last week of April. I know the number because it is a matter of public record. The way most of what they did to me turned out to be a matter of public record. Once somebody bothered to pull the file. When the quiet title action posted, the title company ran its search the way title companies do, and the search returned a cloud on the property that no closing attorney in Ohio would write a policy over. The sale collapsed 11 days before closing, not because I called the buyers, not because I called the agent. I never spoke to either one. It collapsed because the county records finally said in plain language what had been true since the day my grandmother died. And no honest professional would insure a lie. My mother lost a buyer she had already spent in her head. She did it to herself in February by trying to sell a house that was never hers. I just stopped paying to keep the secret. I want to be precise about what I want because it is smaller and truer than what a story like this is supposed to deliver, and I am not going to lie to you to make it land harder. I did not get my mother back. I did not get an apology. I did not get the 11 years or the nursing program or the childhood or one single afternoon of being looked at the way my grandmother looked at me. Those are gone. The ledger of that does not balance, and it never will. Here is what I got. I got the house. I got my name back, clean, on my own credit and on a deed in the county recorder's office. I got the green logbook entered into a court record as evidence instead of buried in a drawer as drudgery. And I got one thing I did not expect, which is the part I have left for last. There was a child in that house when all of this came down. Cole's daughter, my niece, Lainey, 11 years old, who had started spending her afternoons at the home on Sutton Road, doing the dishes, sitting with the residents, learning exactly the way I had learned at her age. That her labor was love and love does not get counted. I had seen one photograph of her in an apron, and it had stopped my breath, because it was a photograph of me. When the house became legally mine, I had a decision to make about a building full of 6 elderly residents who had done nothing wrong, and a niece who was being slowly turned into the next girl with the keys. I did not evict anyone. I am my grandmother's granddaughter, not my mother's daughter. I kept the home running with real staff, paid in real money, on a real schedule. And I hung my grandmother's license back on the wall where it belonged. There is a woman in that house named Frances. She is 91. She has lived on Sutton Road for 19 years, since the spring her husband died, and she knew my grandmother for the 40 years before that. Frances does not miss much. She watched my mother and Dale come and go during the bad year, clipboards under their arms, voices low in the hallway, and she watched a girl with a ring of keys do all the actual work for free, the way she had watched that same girl do it as a teenager. The first week I came back as the owner instead of the help. Frances caught my wrist with one papery hand and held it until I sat down on the edge of her bed. She wanted to be sure of something. She said she was glad somebody finally read the will, right? I did not correct her. It was not a will, it was a transfer on death affidavit. And the distinction is the whole reason I am not in court for the next 4 years. But I let the old word stand because the old woman had earned the satisfaction of saying it. She had watched the wrong people act like owners for a long time. She got to watch the right one come home. That was worth more than the legal vocabulary. She patted my hand twice and told me my grandmother used to say I was the only one in the family who could be left alone with the cash drawer. I had never heard that before. I believe it. I think Opal said a great many true things in rooms I was not standing in, and I am only now collecting them. And I told my brother that Lainey was welcome in that house anytime she wanted, as a girl, as a guest, as family, and that the first time anyone handed her a chart or a key or a guilt trip, the arrangement was over. Cole, who has never been brave but is not entirely his parents, took the deal. Lainey comes on Sundays. Now, she does her homework at a big table where the residents eat. Sometimes she helps because she wants to, and when she does, I pay her in cash every time and I make her write the amount down. The first time I handed her a $5 bill for an afternoon of reading to Mr. Halloran, she looked at it like it was a trick. I told her it was not a trick. I told her that work has a number and that anyone who tells her it doesn't is afraid of the total. She did not understand me. She will. I have all the time in the world to make sure she does, because I have my time back, and my time was the thing they stole that I can actually spend. I kept 3 things from that morning 11 years ago. I want to leave you with what each of them turned out to mean, because the meaning at the end is bigger than the meaning at the start. And that finally is the whole point of carrying a thing for 11 years. The keys. I carried them since I was 16. And for 16 years, they meant I was the one who did the work, the one who locked up, the one trusted with everything and given nothing. The girl with the keys was the help. Except it turns out in the end that the woman with the keys was the owner. She always had been. The deed had been filed in 2010. I had been carrying the keys to my own house for 11 years and calling myself the maid. There is a key on that ring now that opens the front door of a home that is mine. And I gave a copy of it to my daughter, June, who is 8, who will never once lock that door for free. The logbook. They handed it to me as a chore. Write it all down. Asterisk, they meant the pills. My grandmother meant my life. The green book that meant drudgery became the green book that meant evidence. The one record in that house they could not edit, the page that put a state finding next to my mother's name. Restraint, I have learned, is not the same as silence. I never raised my voice once in 11 years, but I wrote everything down, and the writing was louder than any scream I could have managed in that kitchen. And the letter, my grandmother's letter in the shaking hand, the stroke was already beginning to steal, that I was too afraid to open for 3 days and too busy surviving to read for 9 years. I will not read you the whole thing, because some things belong only to the two of us. But I will tell you the last line because she earned the right to have it heard. She wrote something, I put your name on the paper. Baby, where they can't argue with it. Some things you don't have to say out loud if you wrote them down first. Asterisk, she had filed the transfer on death affidavit 2 years before her stroke. She had told me about it in the only words she had left, and I had filed it away as a keepsake while it sat in the public record. The whole time the loudest quiet thing in the county. Waiting for the granddaughter she trained to finally know how to read it. My mother used to say, family doesn't keep a ledger. She said it to keep me from counting. She was right about one thing and wrong about everything else. She was right that she did not keep a ledger. She was wrong to think no one would. So I became the woman who does. If you have a grandmother somewhere who is still keeping clear hours in the early morning, go sit with her this week and be quiet long enough to actually hear the answer to one question. If there is a girl in your family being handed an apron and called family in the same breath, learn her name and say it like it belongs to her. And if you have been carrying a ring of keys for years and calling yourself the help, go read the paper. Read the chain of title. Read the letter in the drawer. Read the record you were told to keep. You may already own the house you've been cleaning. Subscribe if you are ready to go find out. I'll be here and I'll be reading every word you write down. Good night. Lock up if you are the last one out. It is your door. Now